The Underground L Station. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, where it's pretty difficult to get around if you don't have a car. I personally don't like driving, so I didn't have one. When I left to go to college, I decided to attend the University of Illinois in Chicago. The university is set to the west of downtown. I lived in the dorm as a freshman, but decided to get an apartment my sophomore year. I really didn't care for the area around the university, so instead, I found myself a place to live in Lakeview. This is an area on the far north side of the city. It was easy enough to get around in the city due to the L trains and the CTA buses, but UIC offered their students what was called a U-Pass. A U-Pass was an unlimited free pass to ride on all the buses and trains in the city. What made it even better was that it was all included in tuition. Now, while commuting to school was easy enough and affordable enough, one thing that I didn't like about it was that it took extra time. When I was in the dorm, I could just leave 15 minutes before class and I was never late. Using public transportation from the north side of the city, I had to leave no later than 2 hours before class. Due to the amount of time it took for traveling, I tended to cram as many classes into one day as I could. So, the semester in which the story takes place, I was attending school only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first week of December, I got out of one class late one day. One of my friends who still lived on campus invited me over to his dorm room to hang out for a while. I accepted. We had some drinks, talked for a bit, and before I knew it, it was almost 2 a.m. I finally told him I had to get home because the earliest I'd get home, leaving right away, would be 4 a.m. Then I had to try to get some sleep to be up in the morning. So I left the warmth of his dorm room and stepped out into the biting cold of the Chicago night. I walked along the nearly empty street to catch a bus that would take me downtown so I could catch a Red Line L. Being in downtown Chicago that late at night was a significant difference from being there in the day. Although there were people walking around, there were not many. Downtown Chicago turned into a ghost town around 6 p.m., and the trains, which generally came by every 7 minutes during the day, only came every half hour in the middle of the night. Even worse, I had to go into one of those underground stations, and they were not well heated. I bought a hat and gloves, but a Chicago winter will often cut right through that. One of the most annoying things that can happen to you in an L station is, while you're going downstairs to get to the platform, you can hear the train pulling into the station. You can choose at that point to hurry down the steps, and if you're lucky, you might catch the train. More often than not, you won't. This happened to me when I was on the down escalator. I heard the train pulling into the station. I rushed to the stairs, but there weren't many people down there on the platform, and they loaded onto the train rather quickly. I just missed it as my feet hit the platform, and the train pulled away. Damn it, I breathed to myself. Now I had to keep myself occupied and warm for the next 30 minutes. I tried sitting down on one of the benches, although I usually didn't care for it. I was alone at first because everyone had gotten onto the train before me. My hands felt cold and my knuckles felt dry as I waited for the next train to arrive. The underground stations downtown were very close to one another. In fact, if you peeked around the corner, you could sometimes even see the next station. If you wanted to, you could walk from one station to the other through the tunnels. There was a small yellow walkway that connected the stations to one another. That night, I was at the Washington station, which was set up that way. After I'd been sitting there for a little while, I noticed someone walking on the walkway from the previous station. I really didn't like being alone underground like that, so at first, I felt a little bit of relief. As I glanced over, though, I noticed it was a ragged-looking homeless man. He was wearing an extremely thin jacket and no gloves or hat. The one thing that I really hated about living in the city were the homeless panhandlers. I don't mean to be insensitive, but everyone who lives in Chicago knows you can't give change to everyone who asks for it. To do so, he'd have to be making 6 figures a year, and you'd still be losing money. At first, I tried to keep looking down to indicate to this guy that I wasn't going to give him any money. He was standing right at the end of the tunnel, and then he stepped onto the platform. Then he noticed me. After standing there and looking at me for a moment, he slowly began walking towards me. I tried to ignore him, but I had to keep watching him from the corner of my eye. He was very strange. He had to be frozen or nearly frostbitten due to the biting cold and no hat or gloves. And the way he walked was weird. He was hunched over, his left shoulder hanging down, and his head was lower than his right shoulder. His head was also hanging to the side. It was like he was looking at me diagonally. As he walked towards me, he barely lifted his feet off the ground. In essence, he was dragging them with each step. It was obvious he was freezing and likely in pain, but I was just so uncomfortable that I just wanted him to go away. The homeless man just kept slowly walking closer and closer to me. It was obvious he was coming up to me, and he probably wanted some change or my gloves or something. I shivered a bit, both from the cold and the apprehension. Finally, as he approached, I heard the train coming from a distance. It wasn't far away, so it would only take a minute or two to arrive. I stood up, intending to walk to the far end of the station where the derelict would not be able to reach me before the train arrived. I looked over at him and saw that he was smiling at me as he shuffled along. I stood there for a little bit longer. I intended to leave right away, but he wouldn't break eye contact with me. As I heard the train approaching, I just waited for it. The man reached into his thin jacket and pulled something out of his inside pocket. It was disgusting and some kind of thin, leathery material, and it was covered in what I could have sworn was blood. Right as the train pulled in, I watched him take it. It was some sort of mask, and he pulled it right over his head. The train stopped by us when he was only about 10 feet away. It was then that I heard him tell me, "It's my other face." Fortunately, I got on the train and the door closed without him trying to get on with me. As the train pulled away, I looked back and saw the man looking at me. I wondered if he was smiling under his other face. Ever since, I just use the buses to get to school.
When I got out of high school, I immediately moved from the suburbs into the city of Chicago. It was my dream to become an actor, and living in Chicago would make that much easier for me to get auditions. I forgoed college because I was sure that I had more than enough talent to make it on my own. Well, for anyone who has tried to be an actor, you'll know how naive I was. Not only was I getting parts next to impossible, getting auditions was difficult as can be. I was unable to get a single audition in the summertime, none for the fall, and when I went into the beginning of winter without having not even one audition. Finally, about a week before Christmas, I was calling the Chicago audition hotline. This was long before the internet was as widespread as it is now. After hearing the regular ads, which were mostly just for musicals, emphasizing dancing or moving, well, as they call it, that required singing ability that I did not have. It was pretty much always like that, though. After about 10 audition advertisements, I finally came across one that was for a small part in a local independent film. It was an unpaid position for a teenage male for a small unspoken role. The audition was listed as being in Evanston, and they gave me a phone number to call. I figured that was more important for me to have an unpaid role on my resume than for it to be completely blank, and I went ahead and I called to see if I could get the audition. After ringing for about 10 times, I finally got an answer on the phone. A strange voice answered and greeted me with,
"Hello."
I was taken back, assuming that the person answering would at least have answered in some way that would indicate that it was the number for the audition. Hi. I am answering the ad for the movie role, I responded, quite uneasily. There was a long pause before the voice asked me,
"Oh, that's great. Can you come in tonight for the audition?"
Tonight? I asked, a bit surprised. It was already 8 p.m., and I wouldn't be able to get to Evanston on public transportation for nearly 3 hours. I might not be able to get there until like 11.
"Yeah, that's fine."
The person in the ad responded curtly. He then gave me the address and the instructions as to which number to buzz when I arrived.
"If we like you for the role, we can film you right after the audition."
He then hung up the phone. Now, I know what you're thinking reading this. I would have to be an idiot in order to actually go see this guy for this audition. Every single thing about it seemed suspicious. I was desperate though. Other than my high school plays, I had absolutely nothing on my resume. I needed something. I got bundled up and headed out the door. I didn't have a lot of money, so I figured it was just best for me to walk down to the Milwaukee North Line metro train that stopped in Evanston. It was freezing outside. It must have been below zero. There were some people outside, but not too many. After a freezing walk, I made it to the train. I got on it and spent about a half hour riding before I finally got to Evanston. After I got off the train, I realized that I was in a very quiet part of Evanston. I was met by a snowflake-filled and chilling breeze hitting my face. I had directions and knew it was going to take me a while to get to the place. It took me nearly 40 minutes of walking. By around 11:15, I finally found the building. It was nothing at all like I thought it would be. Rather than an office building or a studio or something, it was an old brick apartment building with a gated front yard. There was an apartment buzzer on the gate with about 30 buttons on it. I found the name I was looking for and buzzed it. I waited maybe about a minute and a half, and then I tried it again. The second time, someone buzzed me without speaking through the intercom. I made my way into the building without encountering anyone. Going through the hallway, I eventually found the door, feeling very uncomfortable, but really wanting the role. I knocked on the door. Much like the buzzer, no one answered right away. But after a couple of minutes, a man opened the door. He was taller than me, really skinny and pale, with eyes set deep in his dark eye sockets. He barely opened the door when his eyes grew wide.
"You've got the part,"
Immediately told me.
"Come in, we'll film it right now."
He stepped back, and I was able to see that the apartment lights were off. I didn't want to go into the apartment, and finally wished that I hadn't come for this audition in the first place. The whole thing was just too odd. Why was a man casting me in a role sight unseen for a film and wanting to film the scene right away? When I didn't move to walk in, the man looked mildly impatient.
"Well, come on."
He insisted.
"You want the role, don't you?"
The man half smiled at me.
"Come in, and I'll show you."
He told me. I went ahead and stepped into the apartment, and he closed the door. The hallway I was standing in was dark, and there was only one light on in a far-off room. I immediately regretted going into the apartment. I didn't move. I don't think this is the best idea, I responded. I should just leave. The man looked mildly angry.
I stayed up for you to come to the audition, and I cast you right away.
He informed.
Are you really going to waste my time by not coming in? I could have cast 100 other people easily.
I stood and shuffled my feet. I looked nervously, glanced at the door and wondered how fast I can get out of the building. Looking back at him, I stammered. I really don't think I'd be right for it. I don't really have time to actually film anything.
You don't have to do anything.
The man told me, extremely impatient.
I just have to film you lying on the ground since you're going to play a dead body.
My heart skipped a beat, and I knew I had to get out of that apartment. The man was too close to me, and I wouldn't have been able to open the door and get out without him catching me. I decided to bluff. Acting relieved, I lied. Oh, okay, that's a relief. I just thought it would have been a dancing role, since almost every audition in Chicago cares more about dances than acting. He looked at me skeptically and nodded.
Well, come in here then and we'll film it.
The man turned slightly to move down the hallway. With my heart pounding against my chest, I turned quickly and unlatched the door. The man had taken a couple steps but turned back to me when he heard it. However, him turning was the last thing that I noticed as I threw the door open and ran out of the apartment. I have no idea if he followed me because I booked my ass out of that building, out through the front gate, and didn't stop running until I was back at the metro train, waiting on the platform. I nervously looked around, expecting the man to have been following me. The trains only ran once every 2 hours that late at night, so I had a long wait in the freezing cold for the train. It didn't matter though. The cold was much more pleasant than being in that apartment. I was sweating from running, so I was lucky I didn't get sick. When I finally boarded the train, I felt relieved. I called the acting hotline every day, and about 2 months later, the ad was up again. This time, however, it was in Ithaca and not Evanston. I wondered if I should call the police, but didn't really know what they could do. I called the acting hotline message center and told them about my experience. I never heard an ad like that again, and I hope it was because the hotline quit posting it. I prayed every day that he never casted that part.
This story takes place years ago in a town north of Chicago called Gray Lake. The only thing Gray Lake is really known for is the hard rock band Chevelle, hailed from there. It also has tons of new homes, tons of those subdivisions that I call Lego houses. They all look the same and seem to go up overnight. Well, during that time, Gray Lake wasn't like that. It was a small retirement community with a small school, a few small businesses and a park. There was no bus service within the town, so students had to either get rides or walk to school. The vast majority walked. I didn't grow up in Gray Lake, but I did transfer there during my sophomore year of high school. Unlike other schools I had been to, I made a lot of friends in Gray Lake. I joined a drama club and was immediately cast in my first play ever. It was fun, but it mainly gave me some time after school to hang out and talk with my new friends. Often, we would sit around, talking way past sunset, and then have to walk home in the dark. On October 15th, it actually got very dark early. A female friend and I were the last two people to leave after rehearsal, and it was after 9 o'clock. Although I was only 5'7" and a whopping 135 pounds, I had a lot of bravado and offered to walk her home, because she didn't feel safe walking home alone. She asked me if I would be scared walking her afterwards, and I basically told her not to worry about me. I don't get scared easily. Well, I really had never been to her home before and hadn't been aware she lived on the other side of the park. I walked her through the park to her home, said goodbye to her at her driveway, and after she thanked me for walking her home, began my own walk to my home. It was pretty cold outside, so I shoved my hands in my jacket pockets as I walked down the street. I found the gateway into the park and entered it onto the paved bike path. It was very uncomfortable because I was the only person in the park. It was very dark, and there was very little lighting there. I figured that must have been because most people did not walk in the park in the pitch black night. I got on the path, not completely at the beginning of it. I kept looking around, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared, but cautious. At one point, looking behind me, I saw a man who looked like he was in his mid-20s walking on the path in the distance. I didn't see much about him, but he was wearing a red polo shirt. I had no reason to think the man was up to anything, but I did feel my heart start to beat a bit faster. I figured it was best to just keep my pace though. If he was up to no good, running seemed like the worst possible option. As I walked along, I tried not to keep peeking behind me, but it was impossible not to. I noticed that although it didn't seem like he had sped up at all, the man had gained on me. I didn't get a good look at him and decided to simply speed up. As I walked faster, I glanced back and I noticed that he was walking faster too. My heart began to race and I finally began to get scared for the first time. A quick peek revealed he had gained on me more. I saw the exit to the park getting closer and closer, and I went ahead and sped up, speed walking at this point. I quit looking back, and with my heart racing, I got to the arched gateway that led out of the park. Although I tried not to look behind me, my right eye caught something in my peripheral vision coming at me from behind in an incredible speed. I felt a jolt of electricity course through my body as I realized that the man was running at me and I wasn't going to be able to get away. However, with my heart pounding in my ears, I saw a young boy on his bicycle pass me on my right, and he kept riding away. Once my nerves calmed down, I remember the man following me in the park. Turning around, I saw no one on the path. I have no idea where he went or why he went away. I just went home. During that time, on the far side of town, a shell station had recently been built. Not long after it opened, a story about something that happened there circulated around town. I had no idea if it was true. I still have no idea if it's true. I suppose I could look it up online, but I really do not want to know. At school on Monday, I came across my female friend. She told me that after I dropped her off, her mom had wanted to come outside and give me a ride home. I told her I appreciated it, but it wasn't necessary. She then told me that her mom had been worried because apparently there had been a rape and attempted murder at the local Shell station. What I was told is that earlier in the day, a woman bought some gas, the way it was before, you pay at the pump, and paid for a car wash. Once she was going through the car wash, the clerk manually shut the car wash down, locking her in. He then got into the car wash, brutally stabbed and raped the woman, and locked her in the trunk, leaving her dead and planning on dumping the body after work. He put an out of order sign on the car wash. However, she wasn't dead. She kicked out the backseat of the car, got out of the car wash, and went for help. The man noticed she was gone and fled the station. He wasn't caught until the following day. I have no idea what happened that night. I'm a guy, and I doubt that a man had raped a girl would try to rape me. However, he did try to kill her, and if he was scared, he would be caught. He may have tried to do something to me. I didn't know. What I do know is that I've since been into different Shell stations, and the polo shirt that man was wearing was identical to the ones the employee were wearing.
The Drive. I should preface this by saying that I am gay, and I am very shy. I always had a problem meeting people, because I can't walk up to people and introduce myself. So, since I can't, I tended to use the internet to meet people. About 10 years ago, I was on a website called gay.com while I was living in Chicago. I generally would only talk to and meet up with people in my area because although I had a car, I really didn't want long-distance relationships. I preferred to have people around that I could go visit on short notice. And notice is very important, as you will learn later. However, I started talking to this man in Milwaukee, or actually, right outside of Milwaukee. He was a pretty nice guy. We got along really well, and he was really polite to me. After we had talked for a week, he asked if we could meet up. He offered to drive to the city, and he told me we could do whatever I wanted. Well, I didn't have to drive, and he was being really nice to me, so I agreed. It was a 2.5-hour drive, which I didn't envy him. When he arrived, he was pretty nice. We spent some time together, had lunch, went out to see a movie. It was Munich, a Steven Spielberg film. Then we drove back to my place. We didn't go inside, but we did sit in the car by the bedroom window and talked for about an hour and a half. Then he finally left and went home. A few days later, he asked me if I'd like to join him up in Milwaukee. I enjoyed our time before, and he had made a 2.5-hour drive to see me, so I thought the least I could do was return the favor. So, much later at night this time, I made the drive up to Milwaukee. Now, the man lived in a house, a 2-story house, that was actually pretty nice. He had told me previously he was renovating it. I parked my car and walked up and knocked on the door. No sooner had he opened the door than he shoved a glass of Chardonnay in my hand. He had learned, in our previous encounter, that I was quite the sucker for white wine. He also picked out a horror movie, another thing that I'm a sucker for, that we could watch that night. Well, while we were watching the movie, he was insistent on keeping my glass as full as possible. While this doesn't bother me too much, as I love wine, it has a tendency to go right through me. No more than 45 minutes into the movie, I had to get up and use the bathroom. He told me to walk up the staircase to the 2nd floor, and the bathroom would be in the 2nd door on the right. Well, I walked up there and did my thing, and coming back down, I had to remark on the staircase, which was unusually steep. It was then that he made this comment. "Yeah, I guess if I was a serial killer, it would be the perfect place to hang somebody, wouldn't it?" I was completely taken aback. That was just a really awkward thing to say to someone who has only been in your house for no more than an hour. However, we were watching a horror movie, so he may have just been getting into it. Well, I sat down and finished watching the film with him, and I stopped drinking my wine because I decided I would just leave after the movie. And when the movie was over, I thanked him for a nice night and the wine, and he asked, "What, are you leaving?" "Yeah," I told him. "I really need to get home. I don't sleep well in other people's beds." He asked me if I was drunk at all, and I told him no. I need to have a lot more wine than that in order to even get a bit tipsy. But he insisted I don't go home. Well, I have 3 extra bedrooms and tons of blankets and pillows. You're welcome to sleep in any of them. I mean, I'm not going to try anything on you. Him trying anything on me was the last thing on my mind to begin with, and my mind was still back on that serial killer comment. Well, one thing I should mention about me is that I have a problem getting myself out of conversations. I'm not good at asserting myself. The more I insisted that I should go home, the more he insisted that I should stay. So finally, after 10 minutes of this, I decided I should try and scare him. Now, I'm on medications for obsessive-compulsive disorder. I take Prozac, and a medication called Seroquel, which is an atypical antipsychotic. Now, I'm not psychotic, but it helps me sleep. It also comes in handy for getting myself out of situations, and I hoped to use it this time. I told him, no, I need to get home because I didn't bring my pills with me, and I need to take them before bed. See, I take antipsychotics. I made sure to pronounce it that way. And believe me, you do not want to see me if I haven't taken my meds. He kind of scrunched up his face, as if he didn't believe me, and asked me what antipsychotics I took. I told him it was Seroquel, and asked him if he wanted me to explain to him how it works. He refused, and still tried to get me to sleep over. I did tell him that I had to leave, and eventually it did take a while, but I finally left. On the way home, I decided I would not be seeing him again. I got home at about 4 o'clock in the morning. 5 hours later, I was awakened by my door buzzer. I was in a first-floor apartment, and I had a security camera, and I looked at it, and it was him. He was standing outside my door, buzzing to get in. This man, who I had seen only 6 hours before, had driven all the way from Milwaukee to Chicago without giving me any indication that he was coming. On a whim, he just drove 2.5 hours. Well, I was not about to answer the door, so I ignored it. And then I remembered that we had hung out in the car outside my bedroom window that first night. So I slowly crept over to the window and shut the blinds. And I laid down with my back to the wall, so even if he could see in, he couldn't see me. Sure enough, about 5 minutes, he went over to the window and started banging on the window. When he got tired of that, he went back to the front door. He continued this pattern for about an hour. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I call the police? Well, I honestly thought he would lose interest and go, and I really had no reason to really think that he was going to hurt me, as he couldn't get into the apartment. But he tried. After about 90 minutes of really trying to get in, he finally gave up and went home. 3 hours later, I got an email from him. He demanded that I pay him back for the gas money that he had taken to come see me. He told me that he knew I was in there, and I'd done a really stupid thing, a really thoughtless thing, making him drive all that way for nothing. Well, at that point, I had had enough. I had to tell him I didn't make him drive there, and I didn't even invite him, and I told him how creepy it was that he even showed up, and he still demanded that I pay for his gas money. And I told him at that point to never contact me again, because now I had all the information and an email, and if he ever showed up again, I'd call the police. Well, he did stop contacting me, but I thought about it often, very often. This man was obviously unbalanced. I mean, the serial killer comment could be attributed to the movie, but who drives that far to see someone they barely know without telling them they're coming? I don't know. I just stopped meeting people on gay.com after that. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I want to thank everyone who took part in this video. All 4 guys, the Grimtale Brothers, Phantom of Darkness, and the incomparable Kingspook. I've said more than once that I owe the success of my channel to Kingspook, because he discovered me when I was just starting out and some of my videos showed up on his like page. I am forever grateful. PhantomOfDarkness has been a good friend, and he puts up with my silliness, and he keeps my stream chats fun. I've only known the Grimtale Brothers for a short time, but they've been exceptionally good friends. If you're not subscribed to any of these good channels, make sure that you visit and subscribe. My sister has a birthday shirt she made for me with my birthday coming up on May 23rd. I know everyone can't afford to buy one, but please at least take a look at the shirt in the link provided and maybe leave her a message about how good her work is. I think that would be a great thing to do. If you'd like to read print versions of these stories, please check out the Killer Orange Cat subreddit in the link provided. You can also take a look around at the Killer Orange Cat merchandise store. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave me a comment to let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter, using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address provided in the description. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not yet been read on any other YouTube channel. And please, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.